Coming up on Talking Points, Trump's congressional math problem, why the president is reversing course on upstate New York Rep. Elise Stefanik's nomination for United Nations ambassador.
Plus, health policymaking gutted, how states are responding to RFK Jr.'s rapid cutting of his HHS employees.
And FEMA faces its own emergency. We'll cover all the changes Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is making to the agency. All that and more. Talking Points starts right now. President Trump rescinded his appointment of upstate Congresswoman Elise Stefanik for United Nations ambassador on Friday. Welcome into Talking Points. I'm Jake Morel.
And I'm Andrea-Rose Oates. Stefanik was nominated months ago and had a social media campaign hinting at the end of her time in Congress, running until the day this appointment was rescinded. Here to break down why this happened and what this means for House Republicans is Talking Points analyst Peter Berry. Peter, good evening.
Hey, Andy and Jake. President Trump is afraid of losing the House Republican majority to push his agenda further. However, for Stefanik, this is devastating as she lost her leadership position as the Republican conference chair. Trump promised that he spoke with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson to restore Stefanik's leadership.
I spoke with Mike Johnson. They're going to put her in a high leadership position. But will you mind staying in Congress? Because we don't want to take any chances. And it's as simple as that. It's basic politics. It's politics 101. She's very popular. She's going to win. And somebody else will probably win, too, because we did very well there. I did very well there. But the word probably is no good.
Trump wanted to hold Stefanik in the seat as the Republicans hold a 5-vote majority, but there are still 4 seats left vacant. Stefanik would be a 2-vote buffer. The current Republican leadership fears some GOP House members are not a sure vote when it comes to supporting the Trump agenda. As we saw back in January, 3 of them vote against Speaker Mike Johnson. A lot of the key legislation, like the continuing resolution, was voted against by Congressman Thomas Massie, blocking a path to fund the government. Congresswoman Stefanik said she had to be a quote-unquote team player as the Republicans have votes they cannot spare.
I have been proud to be a team player. The president knows that. He and I had multiple conversations today, and we are committed to delivering results on behalf of the American people. And as always, I'm committed to delivering results on behalf of my constituents.
President Trump is now looking to find a new nominee for the United Nations ambassador. The job is often used as a stepping stone for a higher office. For instance, Nikki Haley was the UN ambassador in President Trump's first term and highlighted that credential during her presidential run in 2024.
Peter, we talk about Mike Johnson's calculation and President Trump's calculation and how the House has 4 vacancies right now, which they're looking to fill pretty quickly. Could you give us an update on all of those special elections and all of those empty seats?
Well, let's start with the 2 incumbent House Democrats that died earlier this month, within a week of each other. Representative Sylvester Turner and Raul Grijalva. Special elections are going to be held in Texas and Arizona to help choose their successors. But we have to look till tomorrow on April 1st for other key special elections filling 2 seats. The Republicans must defend these 2 seats, Representative Mike Waltz and Representative Matt Gaetz seats, but we look at Mike Waltz being the national security advisor and Matt Gaetz resigning, but we look at the Mike Waltz seat, it's more competitive than it ever was, as polling is within 5 points. Trump won that district, Florida 6, by nearly 30.
And Peter, recently Stefanik had a hearing in front of the Senate for her UN ambassadorship. What would have happened if Congresswoman Stefanik had resigned?
So the Democrats are really shorthanded in Washington, but one place they aren't shorthanded is Albany. Governor Hochul would have called a special election to fill her vacated seats, and it's usually within 90 days of her resignation. But we saw Hakeem Jeffries and Governor Hochul trying to change the law, trying to make it in November of 2025 for election. But we saw in New York 3rd, my home district, a special election that within 2.5 months, George Santos' seat was filled by Tom Suozzi. Guys, I'm going to send it back to you at the desk.
And Peter, recently Stefanik had a hearing in front of the Senate for her UN ambassadorship. What would have happened if Congresswoman Stefanik had resigned?
So the Democrats are really shorthanded in Washington, but one place they aren't shorthanded is Albany. Governor Hochul would have called a special election to fill her vacated seats, and it's usually within 90 days of her resignation. But we saw in New York 3rd, my home district, a special election that within
Thank you, Peter. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s new run at Health and Human Services is making some major changes impacting states across the country. Here with more is Talking Points analyst Danielle Blynn. Danielle?
Thanks, Andy. Health and Human Services announced they are cutting 20,000 jobs last week in order to centralize and minimize the size of the government. These cuts include restructuring the organization from 28 divisions into 15, including the new Administration for a Healthy America. They also announced the agency will be going from 10 regional offices to 5. Also seeing cuts are organizations like the Center for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and the Food and Drug Administration. Many of these jobs are to streamline within human resources and communications, as well as technology services. HHS also announced the restructuring will allow the agency to focus more on, quote, chronic illness by focusing on safe, wholesome food, clean water, and the elimination of environmental toxins. After this announcement, Utah voted to eliminate fluoride in their water. Following concerns raised by Kennedy Jr., fluoride is widely recommended in water to help prevent cavities. Over 20 states are exploring banning red dye 40 in accordance with expected HHS regulation. The FDA's official ban for red dye 3 in foods will start in 2027.
Danielle, let's bring it back here to New York State. How is Kathy Hochul responding to these policies, and what is the New York State government doing about fluoride and these dyes?
Yeah, so I think to start, there is actually a city within New York State that banned fluoride about 12 years ago. And in kind of response to that, the rest of New York State did lower their fluoride levels. New York State legislators also recently introduced a bill called the Food Safety and Chemical Disclosure Act. It's similar to a bill that is introduced in California that would ban the use of potentially harmful additives that are given out in schools, as well as any foods that are sold or manufactured within the state.
And Danielle, still focusing on the state of New York, how is New York seeing cuts at the state level because of the HHS restructuring?
Yeah, so New York is going to lose around $100 million in grants for infectious disease prevention from their State Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. They're also going to lose around $300 million in funding cuts from the Department of Health, the Office of Addiction Supports, and the Office of Mental Health. Hochul said in a statement, quote, at a time when New York is facing an ongoing opioid epidemic, multiple confirmed cases of measles, and an ongoing mental health crisis, these cuts will be devastating. So again, this funding loss is coming at a height of bird flu, tuberculosis, measles cases. So a lot of infectious diseases are kind of on the rise here in New York State, and that funding is going to get cut.
Danielle, Hochul is talking about a lot of potential impacts there. How will the new restructuring of the department affect health policy down the road, maybe a few months or even a few years from now?
Yeah, so this new overarching, what RFK Jr. is calling AHA, the Administration for a Healthy America, will focus on primary care, maternal and child health, and HIV and AIDS, as well as mental health. They're saying it's going to save around $2 billion from their already massive $2 trillion budget. RFK Jr. also noted that these cuts and new structures are not going to affect Medicaid and Medicare, which has been a massive concern for people across the country.
Danielle, thank you. When we return, TikTok is back on the chopping block, where the app stands as the executive order to delay the ban is about to expire. Stay with us.
Did you hear about the pony with a sore throat? He was a little horse. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why couldn't the Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Where did cats go on vacation? New York.
They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me, But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
Welcome back into Talking Points. After 2 months, the deadline for TikTok to find a new owner is only 5 days away. Our own Isabella Galan has updates if the app will get banned again or get another extension. Isabella?
Thanks, Andy. That's right. On January 18th, when TikTok went dark, President Trump signed an executive order delaying the ban by 75 days. According to the order, Chinese parent company ByteDance has until April 5th to sell the app to a U.S.-owned company due to national security concerns. Well, it's been 72 days, and as of right now, there is still no one set to buy the app. So, will TikTok go dark again on April 5th? Not necessarily. Even though the president says there is a lot of interest in buying the social media platform, no official deal has been made. The president stated on Wednesday that he is not worried if a deal is not finalized in time.
We're going to have a form of a deal, but if it's not finished, it's not a big deal. We'll just extend it. I have the right to have the deal and to extend it if I want.
But despite that, so many people are saying, you've got to run again. They love the
How long that extension would be is unclear, but Trump has other ways of trying to move this sale along. After announcing his plans to impose 25% tariffs on imported cars and key auto parts last week, he is hoping that that deal on tariffs with China could persuade the country to approve a sale.
years to go.
Every point tariff is a much bigger world,
despite
and
that,
TikTok
so
is
many
big.
people are saying,
But
"You've
every
gotta
point in
run
tariffs
again."
is worth more than TikTok. So,
We got a long time to go. We have
in
a
order to
long
get
time.
China,
You know, we
maybe I'd
have
give them a
almost
reduction
4
in
years to
tariffs
go.
as an example.
And that's a long time. But despite that, so many people are saying, you've
A group of Senate Democrats sent a letter late last week urging the White House to work with Congress to pass another potential ban delay, saying, quote, the path to saving TikTok should run through Capitol Hill. The letter also states how extending the deadline could cause companies involved like Apple, Oracle, and Google to risk legal liabilities. But until then, the app's future is still up in the air. I'm sending it back to you guys.
Hey, Bella, thanks for not scrolling past us tonight. Great reporting. Well, turning now to FEMA. During the first few months of the second Trump administration, government programs have been slashed left and right.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has FEMA on the chopping block next. Ethan Kraut is here to explain how and what that could mean for emergency response as national disasters become more frequent. Ethan?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Last week, Noem vowed to, quote, eliminate FEMA. The department is responsible for responding to natural disasters and providing aid to states impacted. Noem, who's in charge of FEMA as Secretary of Homeland Security, did not elaborate on her plans and whether FEMA services will either be cut entirely or reassigned to other departments, like what is being done at the Department of Education. Now, this comes after FEMA froze $10 billion in disaster aid meant for nonprofits and hospitals. FEMA says the freeze is to review if any of the funds could be used to help undocumented migrants. This blocked money has already been approved for non-government organizations or NGOs to provide services to survivors of natural disasters, like short-term housing. FEMA is also reviewing the funding to make sure it complies with Trump's executive order from February, which is meant to, quote, stop funding NGOs that undermine the national interest. Our former FEMA Chief of Staff, Michael Cohn, believes these cuts can be devastating to communities hit by recent disasters. Cohn said, quote, that will adversely impact the recovery, whether it's North Carolina, Los Angeles, or West Virginia. In these communities, a lot of the NGOs are a key part of the community and the community recovery process.
We want to welcome Ethan to the desk here. You mentioned North Carolina in there. That was a big talking point in the campaign cycle this year. Trump visited North Carolina and promised to them that he would handle disasters better than what he said the Biden administration did in responding to these natural disasters. How is the Trump administration sort of justifying this campaign promise with the changes coming to FEMA?
Yeah, so as you said, he blasted FEMA on the campaign trail for its response to Hurricane Helene. And some of that was justified. There were some issues with the FEMA response, but a lot of it was also because of armed militias confronting these FEMA officials over misinformation that Trump was spreading about how they're using the funds for migrants, like they said in that executive order, and why they're stopping this $10 billion. Trump visited that in North Carolina, the disaster site, on the 4th day of his campaign, and he floated overhaul of FEMA. Take a listen.
We'll begin the work of fundamentally changing, terminating, or overhauling FEMA. FEMA's been a disaster no matter where they are. You've got to run again. They love
And
we got a long time to go.
And Ethan, were there other impacts, I guess you could say, what other programs were being cut, whether it's under FEMA or related to FEMA? Because I know that natural disasters, especially within this country, happen very frequently. So how else are we seeing some changes and impacts being made?
Yeah, so one of the most high-profile cuts so far in this presidency has been to USAID, the Agency for International Development. A lot of times you'd see them help in different disasters around the world. You saw the earthquake in Myanmar just last week. It was a devastating earthquake, and usually USAID will go and help with that recovery. There's only about 15 people left at the agency right now, cut from the 10,000 workers prior to the disaster, to the Trump administration. And because of that, they're really lacking in the response that we're seeing from other countries. China is sending 126 workers. They're sending 6 dogs. They're sending medical kits, drones, and earthquake detectors. And they're sending $14 million. Russia and India and a bunch of other countries in that region are also sending aid. The U.S. is almost sending nothing. And once it comes to the world stage, I know, Jake, we were talking before, Myanmar's in the UN, and they're going to be voting on some major issues that impact the world and the U.S., and it's going to be really interesting to see if they side with the Chinas and Russias who sent them aid when they needed it the most, or the U.S. who really didn't do much.
Yeah, it's a great point you're making to sort of connect these things, because when we see the cuts to USAID or FEMA right here in the United States, we immediately think of the impact that's going to happen in our own country. Mm-hmm. What we don't realize is that, you know, the federal government has been fighting this battle in the South China Sea, and the rest of the Western world with Australia has for so long against China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically their way of helping out countries that are either in crisis from a natural disaster or need public infrastructure built, and going to those countries, helping them out, and then saying, hey, vote for us in the UN General Assembly when we, you know, propose something to not recognize Taiwan as an independent state, or something like that. So it's interesting to see that with USAID and cutting things like FEMA, natural disasters are going to be another way for other countries that are not allies of the Western world to, you know, go in and basically garner themselves votes in the UN. But Ethan, thanks so much for joining us. And after the break, schools across the nation are addressing the federal government's rescinding of DEI initiatives, how SU Student Association is responding at the recent debate.
To an excellent episode of Live from Studio B.
We maintain an open line of communication with the university administration to stay aligned with DEI initiatives. And so our commitment to the mission and values of this organization, not just Student Association, but Syracuse University as a whole, I think that not only have they been very informative and they want to talk to the students, but I think that they understand that we are affected greatly by this.
That was the Student Association Vice President candidate Janice Faison with her presidential candidate Herman Olivos. The duo are running together under their campaign, A Vision for All, focusing on issues like campus safety, empowering student spaces, and bringing a sense of belonging back to campus, even in the face of possible DEI changes. Now, Jake, I know just last week, the University of Michigan did announce that they will be closing their flagship diversity program corresponding office, and citing with the new compliance that has come from federal administration. Besides just University of Michigan, other schools in the state of Florida, I know University of Toronto has even been affected by this, and even Harvard University with their DEI programs as well. So what do we think about not only DEI being looked at as a threat now, but also DEI being threatened in spaces like college institutions and higher ed learning?
Yeah, it's a really interesting trend that we're starting to see, because the first domino, I think, was Columbia. And the Trump administration went to Columbia University and it said, if you don't comply with the things that we're telling you to do, one of which was rescinding a lot of curriculum around studies over race and racial history and racial injustices. And they said, if you don't comply with that, then we're going to take $400 million in funding. Now, that may not seem like a lot to a university like Columbia with over $1 billion in endowment, but it does, right? And so Columbia followed that, and I think people were surprised, and the Trump administration said, okay, now we can kind of go after the rest of these schools. So we're seeing kind of a comprehensive attack on these policies and this curriculum at a lot of universities. And I think one thing that a lot of Americans don't realize is a lot of people are looking at this and saying Columbia, Harvard, Dartmouth, Yale are being affected. They don't realize that the Trump administration is offering these same things to the University of Illinois and Ohio State and state schools that a lot of people go to and know really well. And I want to bring it back to University of Michigan. I think that was a great jumping off point, because back in the early 2000s, that was where the landmark affirmative action case took place, right? It was about Michigan law admissions and if the Michigan law admissions were discriminating against non-minority applicants. And one of the justices said that they weren't, because it was so comprehensive to evaluate these law students that it could not have just been decided based on if they were a minority. And that justice was Sandra Day O'Connor. It's the first female justice on the Supreme Court and a famous conservative herself. So it's kind of interesting to see how it's come in a 180.
Of course, and I think in relation to Syracuse University and our student association, I think that there has definitely been a lot of talks amongst the student body of what that looks like and about how Syracuse will react to that. So I think it's very important that, you know, student association, that putting people in office that you want to see make a difference and make a change, and also just realizing that us as students, our voices matter and they do deserve to be heard. So if these programs really matter to us, if they are that important to us, then I believe us as students, we need to advocate more for them, even in the face of federal administration, and hopefully Syracuse will allow us to do that and more, definitely. President Trump says he is serious about finding a way to serve another term. While Trump has over 3 years left in his term, he claims to be seeking ways to remain in office.
A long time to go. We have a long time. You know, we have almost 4 years to go. And that's a long time. But despite that, so many people are saying, you've got to run again. They love
the 22nd Amendment says that no person can serve as president for more than 2 terms. Although Trump claims that there are, quote, methods which you could do it, yet he will not further explain how he will hold on to a 3rd term or even run for a 3rd term.
President Trump says he is rolling out a new set of tariffs starting Wednesday. He says the tariffs will impact all nations and is calling it a liberation day for American manufacturers. Trump has already imposed tariffs on aluminum, steel, and autos, as well as increased tariffs on all goods from China. The White House economics advisor, Kevin Hassett, says the tariffs will focus on 10 to 15 countries, but has not specified who will be impacted.
Turning now to the administration's legal battles over immigration, a federal judge paused plans for the Trump administration to end temporary protected status for over 350,000 Venezuelans. U.S. District Judge Edward Chan is providing relief for those who are about to lose their temporary protected status on April 7th. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has announced the end of TPS back in September. Excuse me. And coming up on Talking Points, we'll have the latest updates on the information shared in the Signal chat that included Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg. Stay with us.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
The black truck? Hey, Christina from accounting.
Yeah, hi.
Hey, I used to date a girl named Christina.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then she dumped me for my best friend. You want to see some photos of them that I took?
I don't.
I thought we talked about this, buddy.
Buzzed and overshared again?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna call a car.
That's a smart idea.
So yeah, I know, that's why I did it.
Hey, you're gonna get back to the top of the mountain.
Does that mean I'm gonna get back with Christina?
No.
Oh.
No.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When they test you, stand firm and move only when you hear the seatbelt click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Welcome back into Talking Points. At this point in time, the emojis behind you might be signifying one of the biggest stories of 2025, which was, of course, the Signal chat leak where the Defense Administration in the Trump administration accidentally added Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg to a chat where they were talking about classified war plans. Andy, it's been really interesting to watch the reaction and the fallout over the past week. What have you seen from the right that has surprised you?
Well, I will say, Jake, that a lot of right-wingers are upset, mainly because there's been no accountability taken throughout this entire time. No one has been fired, no one has apologized, and I think it doesn't give a good look, especially for the United States, especially when war plans are being described in emojis. I think it definitely says a lot just about the government and what's happening, but also allied nations are just as upset. I know that Israeli officials were furious about this leaked content, especially because it included sensitive information that was provided from Israel. So complaining about obviously their methods and their sourcing and how, the United States is running when it comes to war plans.
Absolutely, and we can take a look at some of those plans right now that Pete Hegseth sent in that chat. But one really interesting thing that I was thinking about is that Trump notoriously is afraid of leakers and obviously doesn't have great relationships with journalists that are the head editors of left-leaning magazines like The Atlantic. My surprise is that Waltz is still around after he was somebody who had Jeffrey Goldberg's number even in his phone. So we'll have to see if Waltz gets the axe or if anyone gets the axe as we move on and if this story goes away. But that's all the time we have for you on this episode of Talking Points. I'm Jake Morel.
And I'm Andrea-Rose Oates.
Have a great night,
Syracuse.